My guest today is a British contemporary artist known for his haunting, hyperreal digital videos, works that combine computer-generated bodies, poetic monologues, and a profound sense of longing, absurdity, and decay. Since the early 2010s, his art has been exhibited at major institutions around the world, including Tate Britain and MoMA, and he's taken part in various festivals, including the Venice Biennale, the Holland Festival, and Manchester International Festival. He's also written a series of books of poetry and memoir, most recently Flower, which he describes as an anti-memoir. Working across video, text and performance, he often explores what it means to be human in an age of simulation and screens, where flesh, feeling and code are increasingly intertwined. Welcome, Ed Atkins.
Thanks very much, Simon. Thanks.
Lovely to meet you. I'm speaking to you in your studio in Copenhagen. How long have you been there?
That's right. Copenhagen, nearly 7 years, I think, although my lack of Danish would attest otherwise, I think. But this studio is relatively recent. As I said, it's very cold. It's suddenly irrefutably winter, really. It sort of skips autumn. There's always the feeling in Denmark that we leap straight into... the lid comes down, you know?
Right,
the grey ceiling of winter, yeah.
And might sound like an impertinent question, but a lot of your work is computer generated and you're working with computers. Mm-hmm. So when you have a studio, what are you doing in the studio?
No, it's a very good question. It sort of accounts for why I've often not had a studio, because to justify having it, I mean, really, I have it to have a place to go, you know. I mean, I do other things. I do, you know, there's bits of drawing and sort of more conventional, wet sort of stuff. But yeah, a lot of it is kind of treating the notion of being an artist in a slightly professional way. So I'm not just at the kitchen table all day until the kids come home, you know.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's full of promise and a sort of conviction that yes, I can do this, it's okay, you know. Yeah,
brilliant. And you're the sort of graphical representations, and you make them of yourself as well in mm-hmm. CG. They're sort of highly detailed, the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a PlayStation 5 game, I might say. So what
I'd go a generation previous.
Okay, all right. Yeah. PS4 then.
Yeah.
What kind of gear are you using for that? Do you have a laptop that you used to produce your work on, and what software?
I mean, it's changed over the years. You know, it really initially it was a lot of pirated stuff, you know, through 3ds Max and Maya and stuff like that, and then a whole, you know, the range of kind of Adobe stuff for post-production and After Effects and things like that. And then relatively recently, when I get funding, I'll collaborate with the real thing, you know, people who really know what they're doing and are using far higher end stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's still, I try to hold on to the initial image, which was basically just me at a laptop with a Kinect that was hacked in order to do motion capture of my face, you know, and then basically just sort of compositing within After Effects and Premiere. But yeah, I think I don't know, in whatever quest to sort of cleave close to more or less recent prosumer developments in the field, I've had to resort to other people. I just don't have the time or the patience required to learn and stay on top of it being good enough, I suppose.
Oh,
you know?
Right, yeah. And you had a recent show at Tate Britain. It ran from the spring through to the end of the summer. I didn't get to go there physically, but I looked at lots of the works that were included in it. It was, sort of intimate and disorienting and all of that all at the same time. And tell me firstly, what kind of things were you showing, and what were you trying to, what sort of emotions were you trying to engender in viewers and visitors?
I mean, there's a lot of video, you know, running the gamut from early stuff that wasn't using strictly CGI stuff, but was nevertheless engaged with digital media. And a lot of it is about sort of trying to make the technology slightly sort of confess itself in some way, sort of show how it fails to sufficiently represent things. And then sort of asking it to hold and elevate and kind of show real human feeling and very mortal, very corporeal things that it really can't do. But somehow in its kind of failure to achieve verisimilitude, there's a lack or a drop that, I don't know, over years I've sort of worked out that feeling can be sort of co-opted to speak about experiences in real life,
Right.
Things that might otherwise be very difficult to depict inside of a medium. So there's often a kind of reflexivity about it. It's wanting the CG to not be that good, but also sort of having faith in its kind of jankiness or its clipping or whatever it might be. It is part of its kind of reveal as a fake, and therefore, I don't know, you're returned to yourself in some way. But the show is full of very personal stuff and kind of fantastical stuff, and with the conspicuous use of tech, it's often asking it to do things it doesn't really want to do, in as much as a lot of that stuff wants to be kind of spectacular in some way, or be fantastical, or be part of a kind of vocabulary or an aesthetic that one's familiar with from video games and industrial cinema and stuff, but then sort of asking it to do peculiarly intimate things like capture a phone call with my mother, or just this sort of halting piano performance, these things that are determinedly sort of prosaic bits of life, but which are somehow rather perversely rendered kind of extraordinary by paying them this kind of technological attention,
So it sounds like you're interested in the uncanny valley effect, and where
totally, yeah,
and that's sort of where your playground really, and the juxtaposition between, like you say, the jankiness of 3D renderings of human beings with these really intimate moments overlaid.
That's right. And I suppose there's a part of me balks at the uncanny valley thing. Has a sort of, like any phrase that gets used a lot, it feels reductive only in as much as, a lot of it is also just sort of establishing a feeling that isn't so clearly one of like the unheimlich or whatever, the disquieting sensation, but something else as well, as something about recognition. Or maybe it is just a properly sort of expanded idea of what uncanniness might be when thinking about your own memories, say, or your own kind of, well, I suppose like all of us, our own kind of increasing cybernetic sort of existence. I don't mean that like, having appended metal limbs and things, but more like just that feeling that we give over so much of ourselves to technology, and it's very quick that one can just prevail upon and then forget about aspects of self which are relinquished to technology in some way. So it's sort of, a lot of it is pointing and rediscovering feelings and expressions that might, that otherwise are sort of subsumed in contemporary experience, I suppose. Yeah.
As well, like, it struck me that the work you're doing it's not anti what video game developers are doing, but it's definitely trying to do other things. And so a lot of video game artists for video games are trying to, if you're working on, say, The Last of Us, you're trying to eliminate all the things that remind people that the characters they're seeing on screen aren't real. You're trying to basically close that distance as much as possible, and you're sort of, pointing at it. Where's that interest come from?
I think it's, in one way, it's kind of a quite a modernist understanding of how to assert oneself through any certain technology, and I would include like a piano or a pen in that sort of world of what technology is, the kind of thing that mediates our expression in some way.
Right.
So a lot of it is trying to sort of break it and in breaking it, find it in a way, because I think a lot of technology wants to disappear and be forgotten. And so there's a sort of tacit politics to the idea of uncovering it to a certain extent, or breaking it, not in a way that it stops working, but in a way that kind of thwarts what one might discover to be its desires for you. it would be, I mean, some very contemporary equivalent would be the way that ChatGPT talks back to you, you know, that kind of ameliorative, congratulatory, patronizing thing. You know, there's a lot of the world of UIs that are designed to smooth out the notion that you are not dealing with something real, you know, in some way. I mean, not just in an AI sense, but just one thinks of just like, I don't know, a desktop or folders, or even at the level of language, there is a kind of duplicitousness that is productive. I mean, it's a sort of, you know, in a really pat way, it's the Asimov kind of indistinguishable from magic, you know, notion. But I think for me, you know, and if the work has a kind of really deep sense of humanism about it, is a kind of about reasserting the experience of being a person alive with a body, and that you will die, that you will lose things, that you will go through life in an embodied way. And then perversely, I suppose, it is a bit weird to be trying to find that within, you know, the depths of code, of digital mediated experience, you know. Yeah.
And just in a very practical way, can you talk a little bit about your process when you're staging an exhibition in the Tate, in a physical space, in a place that's very well regarded, that you're aware people are coming through the doors in a certain psychological state? And yeah, how do you go about getting all of those effects you're talking about there in a place like that?
I mean, I think a lot of it is the pace, the rhythm, the kind of the push and pull, or the sort of attraction and repulsion of, you know, you can only guess, but as a sort of person myself, about what I would be drawn to, how I would move through a space, how my attention might function. And you know, maybe like any kind of immersive experience, you know, my job and that of the curators was to try and captivate and hold. And also in a way, you pull people in kind of slowly, so that the show started in quite a conventional way, in a kind of black box with a projection of a film that was of real things, you know? And then slowly but surely you're sort of dipped slowly into a world of feeling, and in a way a kind of language. It's sort of, as you move through it, you sort of learn, I hope, one learns the sort of way to be with this stuff, and that it is also cumulative, you know. So at first, of course, there's maybe sort of jarring moments. Maybe you read a bit of the wall text in that very gallery way, and because you probably just wandered through the Henry Moore or something, or the Francis Bacon, and then suddenly you're in this thing. And I would imagine slightly skeptical in a way of its role in relation to these things. And so, yeah, a lot of it is just that. It's the kind of, whatever that is, I suppose that's curating. It's the art of kind of understanding what a body, what a brain, what a person is doing, and how they're starting to understand, and how the work unfolds over time. And also, you know, we did it in such a way that there are sort of callbacks throughout. So, for example, there's a piece in the show, there was, the show is closed, called Refuse, which it's actually an Unreal live render. So it's actually sort of really a game playing itself, really, of just sort of crap falling to a stage. So there's a lot of physics sim stuff. And you encounter the place it hits first, you know, the first, there are two screens in this work. And then later on you see this kind of very ethereal, rather kind of diaphanous place where the objects are falling, but without any impact. So you encounter, you know, a sort of re-link up ideas and thoughts and things. So yeah, hopefully you leave it with quite a holistic, sort of enriched understanding of what the work is trying to talk about, and hopefully you leave feeling full of feeling, I suppose.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to turn to the premise of the podcast now, Ed. So I've asked you to pick the 5 video games you'd like to put on your ideal fictional games machine. I mean, I think that your experiences growing up playing games are kind of inextricable from your work, and that, you know, those experiences that you had as a kid and as a young person clearly inform your work, and or at least the tools that you use. So I'm very excited to get into all of these. So yeah, we're going back to June 1992 for your first game, a PC game. What's the game, and why do you love it?
This is Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. This was a big one, mainly because it was 11 discs. That was the first thing. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of changing.
It's a lot of admin.
Oh my God, yeah. But it felt like, the heft of the box. This was definitely a time of very excessive packaging. But maybe it was 12 discs. Anyway, it was a lot of discs, which you'd have to arrange in front of you. Obviously, it was sort of, the first 6 were for the first bit of the game. I never finished this game because, of course, it's before access to walkthroughs or any kind of hints and tips, and it has that sort of LucasArts logic to it. But I loved it. I think it was my first encounter with a point-and-click adventure game and that world and the scum system and whatever the music system was, these amazing things that...
So that's the name of we should just explain that for anyone who doesn't know, that's the name of the software tool that LucasArts built to make a lot of these early point-and-click adventures, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think maybe the first was like Loom or something like that, right? Maybe that's Gilbert as well. But I don't know who exactly was responsible for Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, but it was clearly like this idea of this is the equivalent of a movie. And I don't know, I think I'd seen an Indiana Jones film, or at least it was sort of, in the culture enough that it felt very exciting. I mean, a movie tie-in kind of game, of course, elevated, at least in my experience, that sort of feeling of promise. And of course, you look on the back of the box of all of these things at that time and you'd see sort of images and imagine. I don't think I knew I was buying a point-and-click adventure game.
Right.
But I knew I saved up like crazy for it. And, we'd gone from a Commodore 16 to an Amstrad CPC to the Amiga 1200, and it was quite a jump. Yeah, but you're, the admin of it and just the amount of time to make a dent in it was really... And I think at that point there was kind of a restriction on how long we were allowed to play on the Amiga and stuff, and my brother was dominating it with Sensible World of Soccer, I think, at this point. And, everything else was like joystick oriented and kind of action-y. And then there was this, where you could just sort of watch Indiana Jones dawdle and try, cramming everything into a pot and him say, not that, well, that didn't work. Or, and just this profound sense of patience and frustration. And I remember the music on whatever I don't know what the sound card equivalent thing on an Amiga was then, but always slightly suspicious that it was broken because it was trying to sort of sound the John Williams score, but in this kind of 8-bit mode. Anyway, I don't know. It was that led on to, and after that, I think I got Monkey Island and Monkey Island 2 and then Curse of Monkey Island, and, like a whole Monkey Island things in a way became the stuff. And, and I think they did re-release the Indiana Jones thing on CD-ROM with voice acting. But at this point, what I had was the little floppies and it was all text. And
it's quite a strange combination, isn't it, for the IP with this style of game, because Indiana Jones is... Of course,
totally.
There is some puzzling in those tombs, but it's mainly running around and grabbing your hat and running away from boulders.
Oh. Yeah, completely. And really, you were sort of waiting for that. But
right.
At that point, the equivalent of the QuickTime event would kick in, because you can't point and click your way through something. I mean, a lot of it was just like very tedious solving of like, I don't know, some slotting together of a stone thing with particular glyphs on that you had to line up with a thing. And I'm pretty sure the manual had pages for notes in the back.
Right, yeah.
But that wasn't, that's why I never finished it. I was never really patient enough for a game like that. But there was something in its kind of digestion of media somehow, like this is what they did with this movie, and this is how it gets to be for me or about me or my experiences or something. I mean, this is all post-rationalizing, of course, but a kind of feeling of like the excitement of a combination, a bit like reading a novelization of a movie or something. There's a kind of transferability, or what in the transposition of Indiana Jones into this, I think it was well reviewed. I think people loved it, but kind of shit game in a way. At least in retrospect, I can't imagine anyone going through it. There was a Last Crusade one, and I think the appeal of this was it was an original story.
Yeah, right.
But I don't know. I never got. But it's interesting. Like it continued the influence of that, because I did play like Broken Sword and Broken Sword 2, and they had a weird Indiana Jonesy kind of.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Itinerant archaeologist wandering around. I don't know why someone thought that was a great idea when really you wanted to be cracking your whip or something. But
well, you've given us a few clues there about what life was like when you were a kid. So, fighting with your brother over who gets the computer. But yeah, whereabouts were you? Where did you grow up, and what kind of kid were you?
Well, a village called Stonesfield in North Oxfordshire. I suppose, we both played a lot of sports at that point in our lives, although home was really kind of full of artier things. Both my parents were really into art, the history of art, and both were kind of artists, I mean, there were, but home was a bit...
But professionally, you mean, or on the side, or...?
Well, my mum was an art teacher, and my dad was a graphic designer, but really wanted to have been a painter,
right? Yeah,
probably, or something. But really, it was more reflected in the kind of peculiarity of home. There was a lot of just sort of stuff, big arrangements of rusty materials on the mantelpiece, kind of dad's big paintings and drawings of life drawing naked people, and it was a bit sort of weird when you invited someone back, I suppose.
Can you pinpoint the moment you realised that was different to other kids?
I think probably secondary school. I think starting at the local comprehensive, maybe. I think maybe as a primary school kid, you don't think about yourself like that, or you don't feel the shame yet of the difference. You're just sort of like, in the same way that I could be on the football team and also, I don't know, amateur dramatics or something. There wasn't a tribalism because you're a kid. It doesn't matter, And then certain things kick in, and you sort of pick sides a bit. And I do remember like stopping doing sports and stuff, and kind of going more into like music and films and stuff. I mean, we watched a lot of films. There's a lot of recording stuff off the telly and watching that, And I think the computer stuff sort of, I don't know. I remember slavishly copying code out of Amiga format magazine. No, Commodore format magazine. I think, like with the promise of a really rudimentary game, but getting something slightly wrong. But already sort of, I suppose, like a lot of PC kids rather than console kids, you sort of get used to something not happening on the computer.
Right, yeah.
A game not loading, or
you set it off and cross your fingers for 5 minutes,
exactly.
Don't you?
Yeah, and you sort of establish a weird stoical relationship to technology somehow. Like it's probably going to fuck up, But yeah, I think I was into that stuff. My brother was. We played a lot of things together as well, but he was definitely like Sensible Soccer and Championship Manager and that end of things. And
I would have thought, like with artsy parents, can sometimes sort of reject technology in that way because it's less worthy of your time. But I suppose, was it because of your dad's work in graphic design that he had computers in the house?
No, I mean he hated them.
Oh, he did. Right.
He cursed the day that he worked at Oxford University Press, and they suddenly wheeled in the Macs and Quark Express. I think,
of course,
he hated that jump, and he refused to get onto it. He'd sort of smashing these sort of zip disks around and hated it. But we, you know, that's why we had to have a computer, not a console. It had to sort of at least pretend to be useful or educational. But even then, all of them came from sort of local secondhand auctions. They were never of the time.
Right.
You know, I had a neighbor who was a lovely guy, but I think really I liked him a lot because I could go around and play on his NES and then his Super Nintendo and sit there for hours. We'd sort of rattle through console games, these sort of amazing, slick things that, meanwhile, back on the Amiga, I'm playing like Sleepwalker, the sort of Red Nose Day game or something, you know, thinking this isn't good, you know, this isn't slick. But I quite liked, you know, you learn to embrace that, I suppose, and you move towards strategy games or RPGs or something rather than whatever the world of console offered, you know.
Interesting. Okay, well, I think we can see where this might be headed for you, Ed, but let's come to your second game for now. So this is from December 1996, so I guess you're right in your teen years here. Tell us about, and you picked the demo as well, so yeah, tell us what's the game and why'd you love it?
This is Diablo, the demo, the first Diablo. You know, I mean, you know, probably like most kids, I couldn't really afford to buy full games, but I loved, I mean, I remember me and my brother both would sort of stand in W.H. Smith for hours reading PC Zone, PC format, you know, whatever it was, for hours while Mum did the big shop, you know, on a Saturday or something. And maybe once or maybe every other month or something, I could buy a magazine, and I would eye up the ones with the most demos on, of course. And it was an amazing. I mean, you know, the thrill of that, putting a CD in the drive and then trying these things out. And I just remember like Diablo being of a slickness that I wasn't used to. Maybe, you know, it felt like the production felt almost intimidating somehow. I think I'd gotten used to, I mean, even like, you know, even though Command and Conquer was sort of expensive seeming, it had a different kind of slickness. Maybe Diablo felt actiony, like a console game or something. But also I remember it being very evocative, I mean, just like this sort of disgusting brownie palette, you know, that everything seemed to have
horrible,
at that time, like Quake, you know, that kind of like gross, grim, and it was all just mud. And then there's this acoustic guitar soundtrack that was really haunting. You know, like a lot of video games that we play out loud at home, both parents end up whistling it or sort of parodying it at certain points, going, what the fuck is this thing? You know, but I never really exhausted I just went back and played it over and over and over and over. And I remember it was you go into this dungeon, and there was the boss was like the butcher. And if you open, and you never knew, because it was a slightly randomly generated dungeon, and you'd go in, suddenly you'd open the door and you'd hear this voice go, fresh meat, and it would run at you and hit you so fast and kill you. You know, like, I think I managed to kill it once or something, but there was something, I mean, maybe it's more strategic now, like the demo world. I haven't really investigated, but like then you could almost claim that as that's a full experience right there. That may as well be the game. I never got the full one, you know, I never moved beyond that, but I don't know, it was a sort of, I suppose weirdly, the same time as that, I'd buy maybe like Empire magazine, and they'd have a VHS on the cover with trailers on. It was very, very pre-internet. But there's still a sort of like, this was like the Oxfordshire Village version of the world.
Right,
like,
yeah.
Look at this extraordinary thing made God knows where by magicians.
Yes.
Like a movie that's come out in America you've heard whisper about, or someone's got a pirated VHS of the Turtles movie from Greece or something, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's something very exotic and I don't know, yeah, just supremely exciting about the world of the demo thing. And I think that maybe that Blizzard I don't know. They sort of became, of course, very slick and very.
Have you ever played a full Diablo?
Yeah, I played number 3
Okay, yeah.
all the way through.
Right,
totally. Yeah, but it didn't quite have the dirtiness. Whatever I was looking for, that kind of like, maybe it's to do with realisticness as well, you know.
Yeah.
Even just the fact that the realisticness sort of just lay with like maybe the short little animations of the skeletons, or the fact that the acoustic guitar felt like a CD recording. It probably was, you know, it's just a WAV file somewhere. But all of those things starting to sort of do something peculiar to the weight and sort of, in that case, the sort of violence of the game, of whacking it and a sprays of dirty blood, and I don't know, you know what I mean? It's
Completely.
sort of extreme texture suddenly, and the jump between. I mean, maybe before that I'd probably had like the Lost Vikings or something, and this is like this is cartoon world, and it's kind of silly and also a bit sort of patronizing, and this suddenly felt like, ooh, this is sort of pubescent gaming or something.
Yeah,
you know?
That's, if it was, that should be a genre term. I think that's exactly what it is.
It's where you start to think, whoa, this is cool because look at that blood.
Yeah.
It's like fragging stuff in Quake, exactly. Yeah, which I think I had a demo of that as well. Quake, and Quake 2, Quake 3. There was a universe of demos.
Yeah, I'm so glad that I'm so glad you specified the demo, because you really captured a moment of, it's almost like deprivation. That's maybe the wrong word, but just a lack of access to stuff when you're totally. A mid-teen or young teens or whatever. And it's pre-internet. And so you will play that, 20-minute cross-section of a game for so long.
Yeah.
And it was really
for
just
months.
one moment in time. That doesn't happen anymore. And it didn't happen prior to that either. Very strange, isn't it?
But it sort of points towards, maybe not, but like it feels like it's attached to attention, or that you learn to sort of savor these glimpses or something. It's a bit like, it's like the video game equivalent of a kind of a YouTube short or something. It's like you could just, or a trailer actually. I mean, I mentioned trailers just because that's a form I adore, because it's sort of, that has its own kind of inbuilt editing economy and like how to. But I suppose the point of the demo is to how to prick the attention of whoever's testing it. And I mean, in my case, I can't go and buy the thing, but I never even crossed my mind. I don't think that I would go and buy it.
All right, well, let's come back to your story then. So I wonder, at what point did you first, your computer is very much, from the sounds of things, a device for accessing entertainment. When did you first try and make something with it?
A lot later, a lot later. I mean, I think I got really into pirating stuff, and like not that far after, say, Diablo. Whenever Napster first came out, I think I got really obsessed with the computer as a repository of contraband culture, I suppose.
Yeah, right.
But it's the time when you're recording stuff off the TV and burning discs, and it's a whole universe of piracy essentially. And it meant that you could choose, as a teenager, like all kids and teenagers, you have very little choice in your life. You're made to do a lot of stuff. And then suddenly, if you set Napster going overnight when no one's using the phone, you can get a whole album and feel sort of the little excitement of criminality, but also a sort of like, oh, I'm on the cutting edge, and I can listen to it. And I remember also sort of trying to pitch it to my dad and saying, or me and my brother both, like, Dad, do you want anything yourself? I can get you some Charles Mingus or something. He's like, really? And then you get these things, and this is the strange little concession. But yeah, I think for a long time it was really just about like stealing stuff and keeping stuff. Like, just get this film, add this. But it was really much later. It was the sort of end bits of. It's not true. I used to do a lot of mixing of music and stuff. I did a lot of I had my own little blog spot with mix tapes that I'd done.
Right.
And this is still jumping kind of a bit further forwards. Maybe like I'm just trying to think. Choral draw. Maybe I was sort of faffing around with that a bit.
There's such a like threshold moment you're describing there of like creating a mixtape for the internet. It's so perverse, isn't it? But I suppose it's that moment of that idea of like making a C90 cassette. You know, what's that look like now that I can have a blog spot? It's that question, isn't it?
Totally. And I mean, even after all of the Napster stuff sort of went away, you get, I don't know, Rapid Gator and Mediafire and all of that stuff, and Zippy Share, and you know, all of these places where you can still get all the stuff pirated. But yeah, it was you know, undergraduate and masters when I got a MacBook, you know, a little white plasticky one. And
well, just before we get to that bit of your life, I'm wondering, you know, you decide you were into sports when you're little, and then you kind of give that up. You got arty parents. You're also really into computers. What are you kind of thinking? Are you looking for a way to sort of bring all of this stuff together into a future?
Not consciously, no. I mean, I've always been someone who's very easily in love with things and obsessed, and I tend to wring things out, you know, through repetitious engagement, you know, like a Diablo demo. Play that in every hour that God allows, you know. There's a kind of and the same would be true of books or films or whatever. I just knew I loved all of that stuff, and that was a shared love at home. You know, we all kind of partook of conversations about cinema and music and things, and played instruments and stuff. And there was a certain inevitability to studying art, only because I found school easy and then really difficult. There was a kind of moment of like, oh, academic process is not for me. I can't revise. I have no attention, you know, or something like that, which would probably be diagnosed as something nowadays, maybe. But art was easy, you know. It was a kind of instinctive thing. I was like good at it. But I think for a long time I wanted to be a writer, probably only just to push back against the presumptuousness of home, of like, you'll do a foundation course because you don't even need A-levels for that. You can just have a portfolio stuffed with interesting things, and then you're on your way. And so I remember starting the foundation slightly disappointedly because, of course, I did get good and terrible A-level results. So I was sort of shunted in one direction. And of course, like any other kind of education, the deeper you get into it, the more it's hard to go back. You know, this is like, well, I've done my BA now, and I, you know, had jobs for a few years, and then sort of thought, well, I should probably do a master's and keep going, I suppose.
In fine art, this was?
Yeah, in London. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, but it was very late, where I think I'd been just personally at home, like everyone at that point, using the computer for everything, you know, and was really quite fluent in all of the kind of softwares that you would need, but I just hadn't really put two and two together. I still felt like I should probably try and be a painter or something, or try and...
So was that the main work you were producing up until that point, was paintings and drawing? Sort
of. I mean, I was just... This sounds twatty maybe, but I was just really good at drawing.
Yep.
And I mean, that's why you do art school,
sure,
right?
Of course,
kind of I can do hands, you know,
yeah,
really well or something. And so there was a kind of obviousness to it, and slightly an unquestioned feeling. And maybe art school, the people teaching who were fantastic, but they hadn't yet touched the digital in any way. So they were another generation. So they were still like, maybe film would be a thing, and photography and stuff. But they didn't feel like an overly obvious niche that you would use the computer in, other than word processing or design work or something like that, or maybe touching up a photo.
Right, yeah.
But in the end, you were still leading towards a kind of historical sense of contemporary art, conceptualism or whatever. And it was really only latterly that it felt like, oh, it's a place to make film, but also a place to think about what film is now. I think there was a sea change in the discourse in the general public, in a way, about digital moving image stuff, particularly HD suddenly being a thing that everyone talked about or knew about or had a response to, or was like, it's fucking awful, or or whatever it was. And it felt like at some point where I've been trying to write about art as well, in theory and things, and this felt like something I genuinely knew about through experience, but not experience of making, but of observing and of thinking. So, and then started making things.
Well, we'll come to that bit in a minute, but let's come to your third game for now. So this is from 2014. Amazing card game. This one. Tell us, what's the game?
Hearthstone.
Oh, it's good to see you again. Pull up a chair by the hearth.
I mean, I think probably the biggest time sink of my life, other than, oh my God, I mean, there have been periods.
Also by Blizzard, we should say, shouldn't we?
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's probably not the same people at all, but whatever, there's something narcotic in their production level or something. The sound, the tangibility of the thing. Yeah, I mean, I was never, and also the fact that it balances the sort of, it takes a lot from more complicated systems and makes it much simpler and sort of more rewarding in a crack, like if you're like me and generally sort of easily addicted to things, then they really mastered it, there. But it's not like I played like Magic or anything. It was all very. I can't remember how I first started playing it.
Yeah, interesting. Just describe to people who don't know the game what you do. I mean, that's not easy, is it? But
no. But I mean, you choose one of, I don't know how many, 5 different sort of characters, like a mage, a warrior, a warlock, or whatever. They all have their own kind of hero power, which does something to them. And then you have you build a deck of cards. Basically, it's a deck builder, of course, and you try and choose a very synergistic deck, and you try and beat your opponent, who is also doing the same thing. And but of course, that's to barely skim the surface of something that they're probably in the up to, thousands and thousands of cards have been released, and there are different ways to play it. There are different kind of modes, different seasonalities, different metas going on all the time. And in order to sort of really engage with it, you have to play a lot of it or fork out some money.
Yes.
Or,
yeah, because it's free, of course, to download, and then they make their money by selling you packs of new cards that you want. So.
Yep. I have no idea how much I've spent on that thing, and I don't want to know, And I'm going through a period at the moment where I haven't played it for like a year and a half or something like that, I think. I mean, I tend to jump back into games after a big project is finished.
Yep. So you're in your vulnerable stage right now.
Exactly, and I really need to try and redirect that warm bath, whatever gaming is, But yeah, I think there are periods with me with Hearthstone. There was a period, I can't remember what sort of season was called or something, but there were a few chaotic cards. There was a card that I loved, right, that was called Yogg-Saron, which was like a god. Right, and it cost a lot of mana. So over turns you build up mana to spend on your next go, essentially. And you can cast spells, you can put out minions, etc. The usual sort of stuff. Anyway, this card, when you put it down, would cast a random spell for every other spell you'd cast in the entire game. So if you had a mainly spell-based deck, and you'd cast, let's say, 30 spells or something insane. Then you drop this, and it would basically end the game in one direction or other. But it wouldn't. Also, its targets were completely random. People hated this in competitive play, because of course it just ruins any mechanical kind of structured game playing. But that's exactly why I loved it. It was this sort of extraordinary thing where even a moron who never broke the ranks of, global top 50 or something. And not to say that I was in the top 50, but there's across the world, like everyone who's this shit is about 50, whatever. Yeah, it meant that you could sort of win. You could reclaim things. But there were often these incredible mechanics that were really busted. And of course, you can find decks online to copy and stuff. But the more interesting stuff that would really, really consume my time was just whittling a deck down to something that was a joy, And I did go back to it a little bit with my daughter, who's 8, and we'll get on to sort of talking about playing with my kids. But I think it is extraordinary. It's captivating, for something that is essentially just animated cards going down. But again, each one has a voice, a sound, a flourish, and it is that maybe that is the Blizzard thing. And I don't want to just single them out, or it's a thing that is a very like highly developed studio's kind of MO, is their capacity to add such extraordinary little extra stuff. The amount of attention that must be required, and presumably the crunch and the number of people that are pouring blood, sweat, and tears into every single glittering moment of this thing,
Yeah, it does feel very finessed and like it's been A/B tested just till it becomes as compelling as possible. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
It struck me like, you talking about that in such detail about Hearthstone, which I love, and you explain the game very, very well, talking about your favorite card, things like that. Did it take a while to sort of square, you're a very serious artist, and you also, you lecture at the University of Fine, you lecture in fine arts at the University of Hamburg. I think that's correct.
It's at Dusseldorf now, but
Dusseldorf,
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the world you operate in.
Mm-hmm.
Did video games feel like a dirty secret in some way?
Yeah. I mean, I think for anyone who's not, for a long time, straightforwardly involved in video games, it's hard. You can't trust a world to understand that you playing video games is okay.
Right, yeah.
And of course, I think like a lot of people, you internalize that as well, and it sort of manifests as certain guilt and then a kind of addiction. There's a horrible little cycle. I think quite apart from like people talking about how addictive games are, I think part of that addictiveness is also to do with its illicitness culturally, that people are very dismissive still really of it. Increasingly nowadays there are plenty of artists that happily will talk about it, but that takes a generational kind of move. I think that now, people as old as me are able to say, yes, I've been playing games for a long time and I've thought about them so much with my time, that everything I do is necessarily touched by the experience of being someone who plays games.
Yeah. And you and I think, grew up, in the 90s, certainly video games were seen as, sort of a, almost a shameful hobby or something like that.
Yeah.
And then that's definitely shifted now in the culture and the conversation. And I wonder how that change maps to you starting to introduce the vocabulary of video games into your artwork, which is bringing them into your professional sphere and that audience as well.
I mean, it's interesting because there were sort of parallel things there where, of course, even in the early days making CG animated things, people immediately think of video games and stuff. And even if they're not, even if they're just if they have nothing else to do with video games except that they involve a computer, you are still slightly, quarantined into a sort of place of like, oh, he likes video games and he's sort of And like things that happen in disgusting things like the Gamergate stuff start to impinge on a notion of your own kind of, well, you're probably part of something. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
kind of you get tarnished by something. But I think, like you said, increasingly, I could talk about, it would be fine to talk about, I don't know, modernist art alongside video games, and talk about a history of aesthetics and of a structure. And, there's so much writing now and so much thought going into this. It's kind of beautiful. But I mean, it's not long, I remember not very long ago, I subscribed to this fortnightly literary magazine called the London Review of Books. And I remember the first time they ever had an article about video games.
Oh, yeah. John Lanchester, probably.
Yeah. I hated it. And it was so, and I appreciated that it was about, telling people who read the LRB about what games are and stuff. But, and maybe this just says something very obvious, but until games are allowed to be just the water in some way, it requires this terrible contorting of previous things. Like, hey, games are a little bit like cinema, really, or whatever, and it just felt like a kind of a mild betrayal of people that I thought were much smarter than that, than which of course he is, but you know what I mean? It felt like a kind of still, this wasn't long ago, but still that games are really something to be sort of engaged with wincingly and through gritted teeth, just because they were successful in the culture, or that we shouldn't worry about them, or we should worry about children or something. But yeah,
there's something as well about play, and play being something we associate with childhood, and is not for, you can return to it after you retire and you start playing bridge. But in the main part of life, you should not play. There's something about that.
That's very,
I think.
yeah, totally. But I also think maybe that's why it's a little bit faster to be afforded artists, because I think art is still, I think a lot of people sort of turn their noses up at art as well. If you were a properly sort of conservative, upstanding person, then I think the frivolities of life are all slightly ridiculous, that really, as long as, you should be, maybe you could play cricket or something, I don't know. But yeah, or bridge, exactly. But I think, but even in art, people balk at just not treating it with kind of kid gloves and allowing it something. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? Because play is an active sort of, is something you're doing. You're really engaging with something in a way that is not passive at all. I mean, to me, it's much closer to reading, because it has this sort of instant imaginative feedback, or something that, you are sort of partially in control, in the same way that of course, way more in a gaming situation. But I just mean, like, rather than, cinema, which is, of course, afforded its due, as high art in some way.
Mm.
But then even people involved in games are kind of, I don't know, this is to generalize, but it seems like a lot of people are kind of wary of talking about it as art in some way, as if there's a sort of reversal that's happened where art is this kind of pretentious bullshit thing. It basically, I mean that there's no guarantee that someone on any side of this thing doesn't think that the other thing is kind of bullshit.
Right. Yeah.
Games, painting, pretentious. So, and I think what's maybe about being an artist who also likes games is these are two quite precariously disliked, or kind of I don't know, they're things that you have to work hard to defend in certain situations, maybe.
Yes, and those two audiences don't always get along as well. So you're further dividing your appeal.
Yeah. But I think it's also that, like, increasingly playing games isn't necessarily an identity thing.
Right.
I'm a gamer. That's, I don't know. One can easily argue that people who play Wordle every day are gamers. Definitely. More than I am. They probably play more than me. It's more, and it is true, there's still a preponderance of teen male-ish stuff, like if And that's hard. That's a bitter pill to swallow. But as soon as you open other doors, or you just pay attention to it differently, it.
But that's true of every media as well. True of films. Like it's now so big that there's such a wide variety. But yeah, some of those associations linger with video games more than with cinema, I think. But
yeah, completely. But there's some line to be sort of done between. What you don't want is just a kind of universe of people who are 50 but into Star Wars or something only. There has to be this kind of churning development underneath that is slowly sort of puncturing through some of that thing. And I don't mean The Last of Us because it's more violent or something, but just something else, I think, Yeah.
All right, Ed, let's come to your fourth game. So we're going to much more recent now. 2021 is when it went into early access and then released in 2022. Tell us about this one.
Is this Vampire Survivors?
It is, yeah.
Yeah? Oh
yeah.
My God, yeah. Well, I include this one. I think it's incredible. I think it's just a masterpiece in every possible way. Tonally, like its simplicity. Just to explain it, it's essentially you are a little sprite-based vampire hunting thing. Your only real input is direction. You're just choosing where to go. It's an auto-firing sort of situation. And you are leveling up your weaponry and killing more and more creatures. It's about a 30-minute loop, I think, usually. I also included it because I re-describe it in awful detail in this book, Flower, that I wrote as an exercise to a certain extent of like, what is it to sort of make literary a description of what Vampire Survivors is. And it was so exciting. I got really excited. But because it's so weird. Like I was describing, like my favorite character is Sammy the Caterpillar because he upgrades when you pick up coins rather than the red rubies and things. And he starts off with the evolved form of the cat weapon, which is the smoking eyeballs that move. All this stuff that, in the wrong context is just deranged. But it's also it's such a it's another drug-like
it really
game.
is, yeah.
It's
so compelling.
One more go. Oh my God. Yeah, and I've had to completely delete it from everything, of course. Yeah, but I really
sworn off the caterpillar.
Oh yeah, and I got I got all the DLC things as they released them and stuff, and I don't know. Yeah, there's something in my brain and in an undiagnosed form that really loves that going on while I'm doing other things, right? And I know this is just generally everyone. It's the success of a game like that. It's kind of, it's barely input. It's barely. There are points when you sort of nearing the end. If you've got a very good build or something, your character's just. You can just put the phone down and it's just this sort of maelstrom of weaponry orbiting you, destroying everything forever, But I think it was, and I think, what was I can't remember, the guy who does the documentaries on YouTube about games.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Anyway, but there's a good one. Yes, that's right. Yeah, of course. But anyway, there's one about the Vampire Survivor because it's a really interesting story of this. It's just this guy who was sort of, determinedly making this thing. Like any of these kinds of games, I suppose, but it was such a sort of smash and so simple and so evocative of previous generations of game playing and stuff. But it also felt like the most contemporary game somehow. Almost like, the pleasure of sort of limitation of like, well, what if, I don't know if you think of, that Georges Perec book, like a book without using the letter E or something, this is a game without, what if you've only got directional input, and if you've only got this kind of level of graphics but just everything about it is so beautifully perfectly, appallingly designed, you know. And I mean, it's stupid and silly, all the names of all the characters, these sort of either Italian-based puns or, you know, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous game. But it also seems indicative of where games have got to and not. You know, that they can be self-parodic, but also seriously engaging, but also, you know, there's a kind of complexity, if one chooses to see it as such, about that game and about playing a game like that in 2025 or 24 or whatever, you know.
Yeah, and it strikes me as well that there's, you know, it's kind of ugly in some ways. I mean, I know it's got its own beauty, but it's,
totally.
You know, like you say, the puns and the simplicity, it's sort of ugly, but a real elegance of the design that's underpinning it and the ideas there, which I can kind of see a little bit in, you know, that you're attracted to in your own work, the sort of slightly repulsive things that you know, the outer layer of it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, completely. And I think a certain internal referentiality or something, you know, it sort of feels like Vampire Survivors. I mean, it's barely a title, barely a concept, anything. It's like a loose skin over a mechanism, you know, it's like a kind of engine or something. And I think, you know, it there's not a game that I mean, maybe that and like Slay the Spire or something have really made me feel the reality of what I'm doing with my body. There's something really interesting about, it's not really interesting at all, but but the thing of all I'm doing is sort of my increasingly sort of aching thumb is moving this thing backwards and forth. And the 30 minutes is quite a long time to then start another one and then another one. And then, you know, I mean, luckily it's not on Steam, that one. I don't have an hour count or anything, but.
Right. Yeah.
But I think, that's true. There's a kind of, there's some appeal to seeing the scuzz, the jank or whatever of a technology. It's not pretending to be anything more than what it is.
Yeah.
And even then, barely that, you know?
Okay, we'll come to your last game in a minute. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, I mean, I always recoil, I don't really want to ask anyone about AI, but I'm interested just what it's been like for you over the last 12 to 18 months, particularly, I suppose, this year, seeing, you know, things like Midjourney and just because of the sort of parallels between some of the things you've made and then some of the effects that you see in imperfect AI videos that are now suddenly all over my Instagram and Facebook and they're popping up. And actually the way I now look at video is completely different to it was even 18 months ago, where
it's crazy.
I distrust everything and I'm looking for the imperfections. What's it like for you as someone who, you know, this is the water you sort of swim in? How is it?
Well, I think it's a bit weird, but part of my sort of shtick is a certain kind of faith, you know, and I don't mean that in a religious way, but just like the belief in a very human way that however convincing or however good, you know, the fake is, it doesn't touch the sides. It doesn't overwhelm the human stuff. And in that case, the stuff that I've, you know, it's all about decisions to me, you know, like editing, like choosing to lean into the mistake, forcing the mistake, you know, every tiny engagement with making something, which even though it's on a computer and something, you're still attending to with the kind of sensitivity that a great draftsman might, or something, I hope, you know, where you're really fastidiously sort of trying to make it express for you in some way. But for you, you know, that it is a tool and not a replacement. It's just a way to express something else. And maybe AI will be that, but I mean, I suppose I should worry about it, but because I think, maybe again wrongly, I don't know, that my work's success or failure is based on something other than how convincing it looks.
Yes, right.
Or, you know, it's based really on the feelings that it brings out. And so much of that is so chosen and deliberate. I mean, in a world where you could sort of make a picture of anything or a photo of anything, a photographically realistic image, then the question then is the choice of what, right? So in a way, and then that choice is the catalyst back into a kind of very human experience, I think, is the kind of mode of attention. So I for better or worse, I don't worry about it much. I also, if my work is replaceable by AI, it's probably not good enough, and that's maybe a really naive and slightly foolhardy thing to say. And maybe I'll come to regret that attitude. But I mean, I had these fantasies, and this is more to do with writing, I suppose, but like, if you just continually make things that are indigestible to the algorithm somehow, that are things that are so specific and small that they cannot be agglomerated in some way, at least I'm talking about these kind of large language models or these kind of scrapings of things, the things that are just stealing everyone's work. If your work is kind of, and I don't really know what this means, but if it's sort of so peculiar as to be, I mean, so you're really risking making things that no one wants then. But I suppose, like if I look at AI stuff, produced stuff, unless it's the earlier generations where things are going really wrong and it's sort of hallucinating stuff all the time and it's busted, increasingly it's just becoming the most banal voice on the planet, the most banal, not just the chat versions, but the kind of, slavishly accurate renderings and stuff. It's not even slop. It's like, it's just a version of a vanilla universe that just is being, I don't know. I mean, that stuff, that's never been the interesting thing. Conventional art, literature, music, the middle of the road stuff, which is essentially what happens when you pull everything together. You get brown, you get shit, And so if that's where we're headed, that is sad, but I don't know. I don't see a world where there isn't still spikes of very strange things that you can seek out and find, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah. It's probably naive, and I just don't know what I'm talking about.
No, not at all. Very good. I'm sorry for making you talk about that.
Not at all. No. No, I'm always rehearsing a sort of feeling about it, I suppose.
Yeah,
like
right.
Everyone.
Right. Yeah. All right, Ed, let's turn to your fifth and your final game. So this is from 2024. Tell us, what's the game?
Yeah. Thank goodness you're here. Yeah, I mean, I haven't lived in the UK for quite a long time. I lived in Berlin before Copenhagen. And so maybe I left in 2014, 15, something like that. But of course, I am from there, and I'm of it, and I have a sense of humor, and there's a whole, it's so constituent. And as much as I don't really like, of course, I don't like sensations of nationalism or really any kind of pride in that. But when stumble across this game, I can't remember. I think it was probably just like some bit of YouTube clip or something. And I've been looking for more weird games to play with my daughter. So we've been playing like Untitled Goose Game or something and loving it. And just feeling like wanting something that was ludicrous that we could laugh at a lot. And of course, it's not really for 8-year-olds. Thank goodness you're here. But it's essentially it's a platformer-ish, or just a sort of, I don't know what it is. It's like a living, breathing, very funny cartoon with the kind of sense of humor that's somewhere circling Vic and Bob, I suppose, and feels essentially very British. It's very bleak. But it also feels political. Feels about class. It's very beautiful and ugly again. Again, this sort of weird, gritty, but also hilarious thing. You know, this fishmonger who puts cigarettes in the fish in his display. There's voice acting from people I love. You know, there's Matt Berry's in there, and there's John Log Blythe in there, and it's like a home away from home a little bit. And actually, you know, my daughter who's growing up in Denmark, this isn't why we play it, but every time she now just puts it on, plays it, because it's incredibly simple. It's just jumping and slapping things, slapping people, slap someone's ass, slap someone's legs. And there's always another thing to discover. Slap a bin bag and it explodes across the desperately sad market town that it's set in, you know, that used to be a mining town in the north of England somewhere. I mean, it reminds me a lot the sort of broad Lancashire, Yorkshire kind of sensation of the thing. And my mother's family are all from Wigan, and I don't know. There's a lot of things that it was tapping. I'm a massive Vic and Bob fan, and Bob Morton was basically the greatest person, right? You know, so it did a lot. It did a lot, and it was just sort of effortlessly perfect and beautiful, you know, and sort of weirdly moving. The
Yes.
guy who you were constantly falling down the chimney into the front room of, splattering his front room with soot, and he just gets more and more desperate. And it's so, I don't know, the loop of it is great. The little fetch quests and things are great. I mean, I don't know, it's a very different kind of thing. It's a nice response to, you know, the AAA, quadruple A, open world kind of perfection and slickness. Is this thing it's very slick. It's beautifully animated and voiced, and the sound and music are incredible. But it's also like independent in the most incredible way, like a humor way. You know, it's a bit like, you know, what I was saying about the stuff that's somehow irredeemable by AI. Somehow AI couldn't do this, right? You know, this is something else, you know.
Yeah, independent and really specific, like you say, to a time and a place, and
Yeah.
and in that way, kind of finds it becomes universal, even though you think the opposite would happen, and it would be sort of non-accessible, but it's not. That's people actually love, you know, things to be specific, don't they?
I think that's a really good point, and I think that. And it maybe, you know, at least for a game that I bought on Switch, you know, that seems like a newish thing of like the idiosyncratic voice of one or two people able to produce a game that is sold on the Nintendo eStore is kind of bananas, you know.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And you're right. I think that, you know, this is a kind of lesson of all kinds of artists, is that actually the idiosyncratic and personal kind of flavor that you lend the things that you make is precisely what makes it so extraordinary, or enlivens it, or makes it, yes, universal in a way that seems not very instinctive, but is totally true. You know, it's a voice, and it's very convincing, and all power to it, man. I mean, I think they're called Coal Supper, I think, but it's just, yeah, everything about it, the title, I don't know, man. I could celebrate that thing. So it makes me hopeful, you know, I think.
They won a BAFTA for the game, and there was
Did they?
There was
Amazing.
a real warmth, I would say, in the room when they did, yeah, for sure. All right, great, Ed. Let's go through your console. So we've got Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, Diablo (brackets demo), Hearthstone, Vampire Survivors, and thank goodness you're here. Brilliant console. We need a name to market it to the world, so I'm going to put you on the spot and ask if what you might like to call it.
You know, I knew this was coming, and yet I completely forgot to think of anything. I mean, I'm mildly obsessed with the word sorcerer, so let's go with sorcerer. It seems like a console name.
Yes.
I wrote a play with a friend called Sorcerer. I'm obsessed with the movie Sorcerer, the Friedkin movie. It's something about it. It's the more you say it, the more insane it sounds. But it also seems legit, like something that may be, yeah, I don't know, like in whatever the Sega would call a console. The Sorcerer,
the Sega
maybe,
Sorcerer.
in the Western market. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I definitely. But I mean, that's quite, depending on the price point. there's a lot of hours you can get out of this console.
I think so. Yeah.
Totally,
You're right.
yeah.
Sorcerer, the more you say it or think about it, the more it breaks down as a legible word.
I mean, I'm imagining it now said in Matt Berry's voice somehow,
Yeah. It's been amazing. Thanks so much, Ed. Before I let you go, one last question. Yeah, if someone encounters your work for the first time, whether it's Flower or one of your videos, what do you hope might stay with them afterwards? I know that's quite broad, but...
No. I don't know. I suppose increasingly, maybe because I teach, I suppose I would hope that they would sort of spin away from it with a desire to make things or to express themselves or to, connect with what they do in some way. I think, like the things I adore the most are, which I'm sort of jealous of, and I feel, but in the most productive way, not in a way that I go, oh, why bother, but more like, fuck, I need to do something again. I feel the itch again.
Yeah, I love that feeling. Yeah, for me, when I'm reading something really excellent and I then want to just close the book and go away and start writing, that's the best feeling.
You almost want to interrupt the experience just to go.
Yeah. Love that.
To that, I suppose.
Oh, great answer. All right, Ed, it's been wonderful getting to know you, and thanks for all your picks and for coming on.
Likewise, Simon. Thank you.
Thank you to my guest, Ed Atkins. What a good time that was. At the end of that conversation, Ed said to me that it felt like a weird exorcism. That I think is a positive thing, I hope. Loved meeting Ed, loved getting to know him, to hearing his story. What a great perspective. First time I think we've had a fine artist on the show, I think. Certainly, of course, had musicians and film people on before. But the first time I've had someone who works in the art world. I think I'll get some more, because I think as well, like writers, people who are used to creating art and talking about it, are reflective people, right? They have thought deeply about the things that they make, about the things that they take in, which is very useful when we come to talk about video games. So love that. Particularly loved his description of Vampire Survivors, which is a game that I think you perhaps would not expect an artist to pick. Maybe that's a cliche, but you'd expect them perhaps to pick Journey or something a bit more highfalutin. But Vampire Survivors, in its jankiness and scuzziness and compulsiveness and all of that, loved the way that Ed got into just got under the skin of that one. And also Hearthstone as well. Again, another game that perhaps I would not have guessed that Ed would have gone for, but hearing him describe the compulsion he's had to play that game, his favorite card, the way that he likes to play it, the amount of money that he's spent in it and doesn't like to think of, just good stuff. And as well, of course, Diablo 1 brackets, the demo. Is that the first time we've had a demo on the show? I think perhaps it is, but I'm very glad that Ed picked a demo, because it really captured for me that sense of getting a game perhaps on the front of a magazine. This doesn't happen anymore, obviously. I'm old, but you probably are too. And that experience of getting a demo on the front of a magazine and then just playing it over and over and over again with the monastic devotion of a teenager. Love that. If that's your experience as well, why not tell us about it in the comments if you're listening to this on Spotify or on YouTube perhaps, or on our Patreon, of course, which you can find at patreon.com/myperfectconsole. A huge thank you to Mike Sperlinger, who was the person who suggested that I get Ed onto the show. Mike, thank you. Fantastic suggestion there. Mike did email all the way back in August 2025 when Ed had his show on at Tate Britain. And if I'd have been able to move quickly enough, perhaps I could have got this episode out in time that you could have caught Ed's show at the Tate. Unfortunately, I did not. It did actually end on the 25th of August, so I don't think I would have been able to pull it off anyway. But if you're interested in seeing some of Ed's work that was shown at the Tate, then you can just search in Google tate.org.uk Ed Atkins, and it will come up, and it's got a little bio and then some of his work. If you're watching this on video, then I've piped in some of his work, both video stuff and stills as well, so you will have been able to see that. On that note, yeah, if you would like to watch the videos for these episodes, then you can do that at patreon.com/myperfectconsole, where I put out video versions of the podcast. And they're starting to pop up on YouTube as well, but there's a delay on that, so it doesn't spoil it for people who are supporting. If you're watching this on YouTube, though, hello. The podcast has been going for quite a while now, 3 years. We've got a really long back catalogue. In fact, I didn't even mention this the other day, but we passed 150 episodes. Keza MacDonald, the Guardian's games editor, was our 150th episode, so that's something to celebrate, eh? But yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube or you're new to the show, then please do head into the back catalogue. If you'd like to email me, then you can do so at myperfectconsole@gmail.com. Please do write in, suggest your guests. Like Mike did, people who suggest guests, I very often reach out to those guests and they do come on the show. So please do that. It might take a little while for that episode to pop up. But anyway, I love to hear from you, love your suggestions. Or you can just write to me with your thoughts, your comments, your suggestions. Please do leave us a rating if you're enjoying the show. You can do that on Spotify, you can do it on Apple Podcasts, you can do it on YouTube as well. Just leave us a little review if you can spare the 30 seconds. We would do that. It does help other people to find the show, and it's just nice and encouraging. Brackets, so long as you say something nice and encouraging. Do appreciate that very much. Follow along on social media. You can do that on Blue Sky, on X, on Instagram, and on TikTok. Do put out little teaser reels. So if you're not watching this on video, that's a good way to see what the show looks like when it's being filmed. Do give us a follow, and a big thank you to Big Games Machine for all their help running the socials. Very much appreciated to you guys. Okay, next week, my guest is, you may remember in the latter part of last year, I went to the University of Chicago and did a couple of live recordings in front of a very appreciative audience there. It was great to do as part of the university's Year of Games Symposium. I think this was the kickoff event. It's still going on. If you're a student at the University of Chicago, lovely to see you. Thanks for listening. Perhaps you were in the audience for next week's episode. It is with Evan Narciss. So this is a live episode recorded last year at the university. Evan is such a great guy, really interesting person, graduate of New York University, began his career as a culture writer and technology journalist. He wrote for Time, for The Atlantic, for Kotaku, really exploring the intersection of race, identity and storytelling. And then he left journalism to become a writer for Marvel Comics. There, he helped redefine a cultural icon with Rise of the Black Panther. And then more recently, he has been a narrative designer working on major video games. So including Marvel's Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Redfall, and the Black Panther game itself. He is now a senior writer for Brass Lion Entertainment, which you may know as the studio that is currently making a game for the Wu-Tang Clan, which is extremely exciting. And the trailer for that game has been out. I think it was showed at the Game Awards last year. The game looks great. Evan is just one of my favorite conversations I think I've had on the show. So very excited to share that with you all. So yeah, please do pop back next week. It will be an audio-only episode, and then video stuff will resume thereafter. But yeah, for those of you who prefer that, you're probably cheering now at the smaller download. But yeah, I will be back again next week with Evan, with his 5 games and with one more. Perfect Console.